Once again, this is a online webinar for video tips and techniques for the web and social media offered by the CUNY School of Professional Studies. My name is James Richardson, and I'm going to be presenting today on how you can take your video footage, the video content that you're developing, whether it be for social media or for any other platform, and make it a little bit more professional and a little bit more polished. So this is going to be, like I said before, it's going to be fairly interactive. Um, I want people to just kind of relax a little bit, ask questions as they kind of present themselves throughout the seminar. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I've been in the field of web and technology and video production for 25 plus years. Even though I do a lot with the web design side of the house, video's always been my first love and my absolute passion. I'm going to try to give you some of the things that I've learned over the years to, especially with the rise of YouTube and social media channels where you can easily produce and distribute content. I'm going to give you a couple of tips on some of the things that I do to get content out and to make it look as professional as possible. Today's agenda is going to be as follows. We're going to talk about planning your video, which is key in any type of production. We're going to talk a little bit about basic interviewing tips, production tips to increase the look and professionalism of your videos. We're going to talk a little bit also about selecting the hardware. Whether you're a PC, Mac, or Linux person is irrelevant. We're going to show you how there are a number of options for all of these platforms and some of the accessories that you're going to really need to look very closely at if you want your production to actually be well produced and polished. We're going to look at the software also, whether commercial or open source, that you can use to edit and produce the video. And finally, we're going to get into the whole area of hosting the content. Once it's developed, how can you actually promote it, put it out to the world to see? So with that said, let's start. Planning your video is absolutely the first thing that you have to do. One of the things that I find that filmmakers, whether they be on social media or other platforms, neglect sometimes and to their detriment is not thinking through exactly what the motivation is for the piece that they're developing. Planning it out, thinking it out, and having a definitive goal in mind for how your production should take shape. So in developing the strategy, the things that you need to do are to identify your strengths, to understand what's the best way in which you communicate. Is it through interviewing? Is it video editing, cinematography? What are your strengths? And when you don't have strengths in a particular area, sometimes you might need to tap other resources, reach out to other people who can complement you and add those strengths to your production team. I work alone quite a lot, but I shoot a lot of run and gun type stuff. But sometimes when productions that I want to do become a little bit more elaborate, that's when I have to reach out to friends and colleagues who have complementary skills and bring them on board. The next thing that you need to do once you have your kind of team and identifying your team in place and you've identified your strengths is to define your goals. What are you trying to achieve with this piece that you're putting together? Who is your target audience? You need to understand that in order to create the type of content that your audience, your particular demographic that you're trying to reach, you need to understand that so that you can create the content that they want. And then you need to figure out how to best display that content, whether it be on social media, whether it be through other platforms, other venues, more traditional film fests or so forth. What's the way to get the content to the people that you're trying to reach? This last piece, and I can't stress this enough, is to determine your budget. Take stock of your available resources, purchase and then acquire whatever else you need. And also keep in mind that it's not always about having the best camera. You can have, purchase a red camera or rent a red camera, which is one of the more popular high level cameras that's out there. But if your cinematography, if your lighting, if the story yourself that you're trying to tell isn't very good, it does not matter what type of equipment that you have. Key considerations to begin before start. You want to make sure that you set deadlines so that your project doesn't linger on for days. You want to make sure that you set a budget so that you know, once again, exactly how much you have to spend, what you need to acquire, and that you don't start to purchase or rent things that you don't need for your overall production. You need to flesh out the idea. Figure out a content plan. Basically, understand your overall creative approach to the piece that you're trying to develop. Is it going to be scripted? Does it need to be storyboarded? Is it going to be spontaneous? Figure out all of those things before beginning to shoot. This will also help you figure out what type of talent you're going to need. If it is a more traditional film production and you're going to need actors, um, start to think about the motivation of the characters. What type of actors, what people do you know who might best fill those individual character roles? If this is something that's a little bit more run and gun or spontaneous, line up your interviews well in advance. Make sure that the people that you're going to be interviewing have skill and knowledge in the area that you're going to be talking about. And also try to tap people who are comfortable speaking in front of the camera. Every professional, every person that you may interview may not be the most comfortable person in terms of working in front of the camera. So you need to take all of those things into consideration as you start to plan out your shoot. One of the other things which is important is to make sure that you focus in on the locations that you're going to be using for shooting. Um, Once again, I do a lot of guerrilla style filming. So, I'll shoot in subways, I'll shoot on the street. Sometimes that's great, sometimes not so much because it's a little bit unpredictable. Many times, if you're shooting content, it's sometimes best to plan ahead to make sure that you have a specific location in mind and have rights to that location, access to that location, so that you consider larger things such as lighting and setup, as well as the amount of noise, ambient noise that may be in the area. You don't want to shoot somewhere where there's constant traffic moving by or there's really poor lighting, because once again that'll affect the overall production value of your piece. You need to understand what is the purpose of your content. What are the key objectives that you're looking to achieve by creating this video? You need to also understand your key message. What are you trying to convey? And last but not least, if at all possible, you should try to figure out a way to monetize the video content that you're developing. We all do this because we love it. But sometimes if you can love it and get paid for it, that's even better. It's an excellent time to be a video creator because the software and hardware is extremely more powerful than it was even just a few years ago. Point and shoot cameras now basically shoot high definition video. There's infinite number of ways to bring decent audio in and small lighting setups, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. And there's avenues for you to distribute your content, such as Vimeo, YouTube, and ways in which to monetize it. So there's never been a better time in the history of filmmaking than now to be a video content creator. So we're going to start off in terms, if you're looking to do an interview type setup, some of the things that you should consider. The first thing is, before you interview someone, be prepared. Understand what you're going to ask them, understand what their particular skill and motivation is, so that the questions can be thoughtful and you don't waste a whole lot of time. You don't want to waste your time, and you definitely don't want to waste the interviewer's time, the interviewee's time, as you're basically going through the interview. And you should know a little bit about the subject that you're asking about. So prepare in advance. There's certain interviewers which are excellent. Um, guys who I used to watch quite a bit, some that you may know, like Stephen Colbert or Jon Stewart, for example. Even though they're comedians, they do prepare quite a bit, and that comes through sometimes in many of the interviews that they actually have, where they're able to really kind of talk to certain subjects with their interviewees. you know, as you're beginning your interview, maintain eye contact. Create that sense of connection with the person that you're talking to. This helps to set them at ease. And this is very important because when they're ill at ease, it kind of comes through the video and it can make the interview look a little uncomfortable. So try to make that type of personal connection with them and do whatever is possible to set the people who you're interviewing at ease. Prepare the person that you're working with that this is an edited process, so there may be times when we may need to break out of the conversation, stop for a second to redirect, and that's normal. When I interview people, one of the things I try to do is I try to make it so that almost like the camera's not there, that it becomes just almost like a personal one-on-one talking session with the person, so that once again they become very much calm and relaxed, and almost like they're just talking to just a general friend over a cup of tea or something. And that's very important in terms of setting the stage for a comfortable interview. You can shoot these type of interviews in almost any setting, but I usually like to control where I interview people at, so that once again I can prepare that the lighting is great, and more important than anything else, that I can prepare that there's very little noise or distractions around that will interfere with the flow of the conversation. One of the more difficult interviews that I've ever done was actually, I interviewed a fellow martial artist, guy that I was interviewing on a piece about martial arts. And we interviewed each other at a diner. And there was noise in the background. There was plates being moved and so forth. It actually worked out to be okay. Um, but it was more challenging because there were so many different variables and unpredictable things that were happening around us. So, if at all possible, try to control where the interviews are actually set up for the most relaxing type of production. So, let's talk about production tips. Minor things that you can start off to improve the quality is make sure that your lighting is great. Some things that you can do, lighting can go a long way to making even really cheap cameras look much more professional. Some things that you can do right off the bat is, make sure that you set the white balance on your camera, which is something that sometimes people, believe it or not, forget to do. I'm a big proponent of using natural light if at all possible. It cuts down on the amount of equipment that you have to lug around, and it also is more natural in many instances. But when you can't use natural lighting, if at all possible, try to use a 3-point lighting setup if you have the equipment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Lighting equipment can be purchased or rented very inexpensively. Once again, I shoot a lot of guerrilla stuff, so and I'm a cheap person by nature, so I don't like spending a whole lot of money if I don't have to. There's lighting kits, green screening kits that you can purchase on Amazon or eBay that will run anywhere from as low as $50 to as high as 300-400 for basic entry level kits. These are quite well built in most cases, but they're not so expensive that if you break them or if you take them on a location shoot, if they do get damaged, you're not going to be upset because it's only a couple of $100. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but lighting is probably the key thing I will tell you that will improve the overall quality of your production. When we talk about three-point lighting, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Three-point lighting is a way of adding a little bit more of depth to your subject, where you have three individual lights, one called the backlight, one called the fill light and the other called the key. If you can look in the diagram that I have on the left or right here, you can see that the uh, key light is the one that's basically coming directly at the person. The fill is coming from off to the side, which also helps to add a little bit of uh, um, clarity or a little bit of dimension or covering up some of the shadows on the face. And then we have the light coming from the back, which adds a little bit more depth or a little bit more 3D to the overall presentation. All of these working in conjunction will make the character, the person that you have in front of you, pop a little bit more on screen. But this is all kind of subjective. And how I look at lighting and how you may view lighting may be very different. So lighting is one of those subjective things that you have to play with until you get the look and the feel of the scene that you want. 3 point is kind of a starting point. But I've done shoots with one light, two lights, more than three. So it really depends on your working conditions, and it's very subjective. So don't be afraid to play with it until you get the type of look that you want. But even more important than lighting and the actual video quality is sound. You know, we'll all watch really bad or grainy video. We've done it on the internet hundreds of times. The one thing that people will not do is listen to horrible audio. It turns them off. So whatever you can do to improve the audio quality of your production, that's something that you should spend even more time on than even the video, in my opinion. There are a number of different microphones that are very cheap, inexpensive, but also produce extremely decent quality. There are built-in mics, ones which come on the camera. Those are usually not the greatest, but they can still do on a pinch, especially with some of the newer cameras. The audio quality, especially if you're shooting from very close, can work fairly well. There are attachable microphones that can be clipped on, such as lapel mics or lavaliers. You know, I try not to use them whenever possible, just because that's one more thing that I have to carry around. I'm a little bit more of a proponent of using kind of external mics or shotguns that allow me to basically attach a mic directly to the camera as opposed to attaching it to the subject. These are examples of some of the microphones that I've used over the years. And the ones that you see here are all ones which I use still to this day. The one that I'm most interested in or most hyped about right now is the one up at the top called the Takstar, the SGC 598 microphone. It's a shotgun microphone. I've recently purchased that to replace the Rode video mic, which is kind of a staple for a lot of DSLR filmmakers. The Rode mics they're shotguns, so they're directional mics, which usually pick up whatever sound is directly in front of them. Um, the Taskar does pretty much the exact same thing, and the quality is pretty much on par with the Rode. The main difference between the two is that the Rode will run you about $200 to $250. The Takstar is a cheap Japanese Chinese ripoff. I think it's made in China, and it'll run you probably in the area of about 30 to 40 bucks for comparable quality. So I was looking to replace my Rode out, and I wound up buying two Tackstars just because they were so cheap. And once again, if I damage them, I can take them out on shoots, run and gun. If I bang them up, it's only 30 bucks. I can replace that pretty easily as opposed to shooting a little bit more run and gun style with more expensive microphones. Some of the other microphones that you see here, the Audio Technica, the Samsung, or the USB um, Logitech microphone, I use for more podcasting. I use those for content that I usually use on YouTube when I want to record audio and keep it fairly clear. Um, Most of those, all of those use USB, so they plug directly into either a mixer or directly into my computer. And they're all fairly inexpensive, high quality or decent quality microphones. The things to keep in mind when recording your audio is to pick decent locations. Think about whether or not you may need to add sound after you've recorded the material, such as sound effects, music, voiceovers, whether it's audio from just general ambiance from the initial location shoot, and consider how much you might need to tweak the audio during post-production, equalizing it, removing sounds, pops, and so forth. These are all things that you need to be concerned about when using audio. The other thing that you need to be very mindful of, not so much with audio, but in terms of camera movements, is how you move the camera itself. I'm a big proponent of keeping camera movement to a minimum. If you move the camera around far too much, you kind of get that home movie effect, like your friends used to show you when they came back from vacation, and you almost get seasick because the camera's been moving around so much, following him and his kids. I'm a big proponent of setting the camera up, picking your individual shot, and letting it run. If you need to adjust, stop the shot, zoom in, zoom out, pan left, pan right, tilt up, tilt out, set up the shot, and then begin filming again. Keep camera movement to a minimum. I use the zoom only in between when adjusting shots. I pan and tilt only when I have a good reason to. As I said before, movement when it's unnecessary, unless you're trying to create kind of a sense of hectic motion or something like that, keep it to a minimum. In terms of the hardware that people use, you can get the job done nowadays without breaking the bank. Whether or not you're on Apple, Windows, Linux, whatever the case may be, it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. I have both platforms. Actually, I have all three major platforms. The thing to keep in mind when purchasing computer equipment for video editing and video production is to make sure that you have lots of RAM, a big hard drive, a RAID setup if at all possible. If not, make sure that you have, if you don't go RAID, at least make sure that you have a decent backup solution so that you don't lose footage and that your hard drives are fast. I'm None of the hard drives that I use are anything less than 7,200 RPMs. And for the most part, I've started to migrate towards solid state drives in order to make sure that the content can be captured very quickly and there's very little moving parts. If at all possible, to get the fastest multi-core processor that you can get, and make sure that you get a decent graphics card in terms of your computer. From a digital camera standpoint, there are infinite number of choices. These are just some of the ones that I have, whether they be traditional camcorders. A lot of people have migrated to DSLRs. I, believe it or not, still shoot many times with little small point and shoot cameras. As you can see, most of the ones that I have listed here are Canon. I'm kind of a Canon fanboy. Um, that's not to say Canon is better than Nikon or whatever. I don't want to get into that type of argument. But Canon is my personal preference. I have other friends who shoot on Canons and Panasonics and any number of other platforms and actually love them. The thing is nowadays is to make sure that your camera shoots high definition, that it shoots different frame rates, whether it be 24 frames per second, 30, 60 frames. But I'm a big proponent of making sure that you can shoot full HD if at all possible. All of the cameras that you see here do that, and many of them have relatively okay onboard audio. Not the greatest. But at least passable. Whether they be webcams, whether they be this little HTC Re camera that you see in the lower corner, all of them have some basic audio capturing capabilities built in. Something that people overlook quite a bit is that most modern smartphones are pretty darn good. If you look at the new iPhone, for example, many people are absolutely loving it because the camera and the audio quality is vastly superior to professional cameras from just a few years ago. So those are also things that you can take into consideration when looking at the resources that you have to produce video content. Some accessories that you should consider: onboard lighting. The LED lights that you see over on the left side of this slide are fairly cheap and produce a ton of light in small settings. Most of those will run you anywhere as low as 15 bucks to as much as 50, 60 bucks tops. They can fit right on top of a DSLR camera or on top of a tripod, and believe it or not, can pump out tons of light for interview type settings or on the go shooting. Mini tripods or tripods to hold your camera steady, to once again to reduce motion. Those are also very good. And also the softbox or the small lighting kits that I mentioned earlier in the broadcast can be picked up very easily, very cheaply, and can once again add to your overall production value. In terms of software, whether you're using Apple or PC, there's a number of different options. Apple has a number of programs that you can actually that come installed, such as iMovie, GarageBand, iPhoto, Pages, all of those that previously called programs to create digital content that you can use to um, record audio, music, and shoot your video all in one. PCs don't have as many nicely produced programs. There's Window Movie Maker. There's the built-in Windows Photo Editor. I don't really like those, believe it or not, but they can be used quite okay in a pinch. There are other options that we'll look at in a bit, particularly for the Windows side. There are a number of open source and free programs or low cost programs that you can use. On the PC side, two of the programs that are well known are the Sony Movie Studios Suite Edition. And that comes, you can pick that up for probably less than 150 bucks, depending on where you go. And it comes loaded with a ton of stuff like Sony Vegas, which is kind of a similar program to GarageBand on the Apple side. Allows you to create utilizing royalty-free music to produce soundtracks or audio music for your video productions. Same thing with Acid, SoundForge. These are two music-based programs that allow you to add soundtracks and sound effects to your overall production. What else do we have here? FX Home. There's a number of programs that they have, and we'll talk about FX Home and their main program that they use called Hit Film, which can be used to create special effects. We'll come back on that one as well. One of the other programs that most people may be familiar with, have heard of, is Adobe Premiere and Photoshop. The higher end versions of those programs can run you a couple $100 a piece. However, Adobe does have scaled down versions of them called Adobe Premiere Elements and Adobe Premiere Photoshop Elements. Excuse me, Adobe Premiere Elements and Adobe Photoshop Elements. You can usually pick both of those up in a bundle for about 90 bucks. If you're part of an educational system like the School of Professional Studies and you have an ID, you can actually get that for much less, probably somewhere around anywhere between 50 to 60 bucks with an educational discount. So that's also something to keep in mind. All of these programs will work fine for most social media productions, particularly anything that you want to toss up on YouTube or so forth. And they're fairly powerful programs and easy to learn. The learning curve on both of them are pretty low. Higher end options are the Adobe Creative Suite. That'll run you a little bit, probably in the area of about 50 bucks per month. But that's sometimes more than some people want to spend. And some of the lower cost options, unless you're looking to produce a whole lot of content, you can probably pass on the Adobe Creative option. I'm actually a big proponent of it. I love it, but for me, it's kind of a necessity for some of the stuff that I do. There are other low-cost options to create digital content. There's free stuff such as Screencast-O-Matic, which is good for recording video, um, screenshots, recording video movements on your computer. If you wanted to do lectures or PowerPoint presentations like what you're seeing right before you now, um, there's a few of those programs as well. And the cost of those are fairly low. Screen Screencast-O-Matic will run you about 15 bucks for the year, and it's similar in production or quality to Camtasia or ScreenFlow that you may see on the PC and Mac side. These are some higher end commercial options, but such as Lightworks, which is what you see before you. This was one of the programs I used to use quite a bit until they took it from a totally free option to a more of a professional version. And they stripped out a lot of features. It's still great and they still offer a free option, but it limits your maximum resolution to about 720p, which is still fine for YouTube and Vimeo and for most web-based content. But unless if you want to use full high definition video or output your content like that, Lightworks then requires you to bump up to the paid version. And that currently is available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. One that I've come across and been using quite recently is called HitFilm, and this is by the company FX Home that I mentioned earlier. They have a paid version or a pro version of HitFilm, but there's also a free version that they give away that has many of the more powerful features included in the package. HitFilm combines not only video editing but also special effects. So think of it in a way kind of like a program that combines some of the basic or essential qualities of Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects into one package. The link for this is right here, and HitFilm is available on Windows and Mac. Last but not least, once you've gotten to the point of creating the content, the thing that most people need to figure out at that point is where should you host it? For me is I host my content pretty much everywhere. I host it on my own website. I host it on numerous social media sites. Um, you have to come up with a content strategy that works for you and works in terms of your overall objective. There are independent filmmakers who might want to get their film on places such as Netflix or some of the Amazon content or other more paid or lockdown venues. There are other video content creators such as myself who want to monetize their own content for themselves and promote their footage on YouTube, Vimeo, or any number of other video content sites, and utilizing AdSense and so forth to monetize the overall content of the cost of the production. So where you host your content is going to depend on overall what your overall motivation is and what your overall financial scheme is. Um, Social media for me is the single best place for me to host my content. I can reach far more people. In addition to that, I control the overall content itself. I don't have to deal with middlemen to a large extent. It allows me to bring whatever message I have directly to the demographic and the customer base or the viewership that I want to reach. Um, as I said before, hosting the video can be anywhere from totally free to far more expensive options. You know, it really depends on what your budget is and what your overall content strategy is. Whether you go for Tumblr, Blogger, there are any number of kind of like WordPress type sites where you can basically create a website very quickly and hang your content on. You can develop your own website from scratch. Or once again, you can leverage pretty much just all of your video content on sites such as YouTube. The options that you have are pretty substantial. Um, so you really need to think through exactly who you're trying to reach and what's the best way to get that content directly to your viewers. And last but not least, don't be afraid to tie in all of your social media channels with your website. And don't be afraid to develop web content or video content for some of the emerging platforms as well, such as Snapchat, such as Vine. There are any number of up and coming video content channels that will allow you to basically speak directly to a user base. Um, One of the newer ones, which is launched fairly recently by filmmaker Casey Neistat, for example, is a video content site called Beam, where it's much more real time, real life, interacting with video and basically broadcasting it to a small network of friends and followers that you have, which is a different way that content is now being shared. So how this content is being developed, move back and forth, is going to change substantially. The thing to keep in mind is that as filmmakers, as video content creators, is that um, if you understand the basics of production, of how to create engaging content, how to craft a story narrative, um, how to utilize the equipment that you have to get the most out of it so that your content is clear, visually engaging, audio pleasing to the ear from an audio standpoint, um, you can do well within the realm of social media and developing content. I'm going to leave my contact information here. My name is James Richardson. I basically run the communication and media program at the School of Professional Studies. If you have any questions about this presentation or about any of the um, video production tips that were talked about in this production, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love hearing from fellow filmmakers and understanding the types of projects that you're doing. So feel free to reach out to me. If you have any questions about the communication and media program here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, you'll see our email information listed here. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the production, and I'll see you the next time we produce.